Welcome to the Developmental, a podcast about the messy, beautiful ways grown-ups grow up. Here, we explore turning the science into the day-to-day practice of adult development in teams, homes, organizations, and life. Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Developmental. Those of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while know that with every episode, I try to bring in front of you people who are not just knowledgeable in the science and practice of vertical development, but who are actually living it in their lives, in their careers, applying this theory in practice, and being able to tell a story about how beautiful and messy the journey of human growth actually is. My guest today, Samantha Kropf, is one of the people who has taught me most about what it means to actually work on your development day in, day out. Her life and career story are absolutely inspiring, and she speaks very candidly about what it takes to, in Bob Kegan's words, look at that which before you were looking through. The work of noticing your mindsets, challenging your beliefs constantly, and transforming incrementally through trial and error, through experimentation, and through a constant choice to step into discomfort. Samantha Kropf is a manager of leadership development in the New South Wales government and also a leadership coach. She has spent her career working in government organizations, both in leadership development and also as a technical specialist. Samantha is an experienced executive coach, having coached senior police leaders both across Australia as well as 8 international police agencies over the last 4 years. Sam started her career as a forensic investigator, working both nationally and internationally on Commonwealth police investigations, working to dismantle global organized criminal syndicates and also helping Australian citizens or those overseas during times of crises, such as Timor-Leste, to help during civil unrest, or deploying to Netherlands to assist with the investigation of the downing of MH17, or deploying interstate to help with fatal bushfires. Samantha transitioned from investigating crime to using her investigative skills to explore what influences leadership behaviors and how to support leaders to grow and develop, not just a leader, but as a human being. She can see the exponential impact leaders can have on others and organizations, and it is her passion to find ways to support current and aspiring leaders to be the best versions of themselves. Samantha works with vertical leadership development in her coaching practice and as a leader herself. She is a living example of applying the tool to herself for her own growth and works with leaders who want to do the same. She is especially passionate about supporting female leaders to let go of the conditioning that keeps them small and support them to feel safe, to be seen, and reach more of their leadership potential. I have so many more thoughts about this conversation. I'll share some of them with you after you listen to my dialogue with Sam, and I'm very curious what wisdom nuggets you take from it. So without further ado, Samantha Kropf. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Alice. So good to see you.
Always so good to see you. Welcome to the Developmental. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
another Nerd Out with me.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here today, really.
How are you feeling, really? Excited? Tell me more.
I'm excited. I'm probably a little nervous, and also I feel really humbled because I've listened to many of your guests, and it's so generous of you to open the door to invite me in, and I'm just, I know I'm among really great, wonderful people as one of your guests. So look, thank you so much.
The humbled one is me. I need to say very overtly, you are one of my favorite dialogue, going down rabbit holes. We were just saying before we started the recording that both of us have more thoughts that sometimes we can put into words. So all of our conversations tend to go very deep, very fast. So
Yeah.
I'm so grateful you chose to bring one of these conversations out into the open.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I have a friend that she says if I need a friend to call that's going to go deep, I'm the one she calls. So
Yeah.
I always like a kindred spirit that's happy to go deep. So that's me for sure.
No chit chat for us. I read your bio before we started this recording, but I'd love to maybe speak a little bit to the context of how we met and the context of how this conversation came to be, because it actually has a story to it, which will be part of what we're gonna explore together.
Uh-huh.
I can't, it feels like a lifetime, honestly, but I know it's only maybe 3 years or 2.5 years or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe about 2.5 years. Yes.
Yeah, but sometimes in life you've got people that when you meet, you feel like you've known them forever, and this has been one of those moments. But I still
Yes.
remember where you were sitting. I was doing this workshop with about 80 leaders from the Australian
Mm-hmm.
Federal Police, and there was this smiling, encouraging face somewhere in the last row of tables. And I remember I looked at you as an anchor through that day, because that was an interesting, challenging day. We went out of our comfort zones in
Yes.
many ways. So sometimes as a facilitator,
Oh,
you
I didn't know
anchor.
you had
You
done
didn't.
that. Oh my gosh.
Yes, I felt very grounded by your presence, and you were there as an observer because you were doing work internally with leaders within
Yes.
AFP.
I
So
had I had delivered an hour session with them as well. So probably part of me knew the energy of the room and how challenging it can be sometimes. So yeah.
yeah, so that was that silent initial connection, and then we started talking, and then we partnered on all of the projects really that I've done with AFP after that moment, up until
Yes.
when you moved into a new role in a different agency. But that turned also into a beautiful friendship that I value deeply.
Yeah, it's such a nice description. Yes. I met you just after I'd completed my vertical development training, actually. So it was just beautiful timing. It was
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
we share a passion for this topic, and I think both of us also share a belief that you can only grow if you actually do the work yourself.
Yep. Yep. 100%.
So I think for me, this, or for us, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of recording this podcast came from, can we make that visible? Can we talk about the journey of development that sometimes sounds so abstract,
Mm-hmm.
and so almost theoretical, and it's very hard to put your finger on what is it really that changes? How do people really experience that?
Mm-hmm.
And because both of us have both a theoretical and practical interest in the topic, but also are striving in our own ways to really live it in our own lives as mothers, as
Mm-hmm.
wives, as you a leader, both of us coaches. I think there's
Yeah.
something in that lived experience that can be really, really interesting to explore and bring to life.
Yeah, 100%. I've always had quite a hunger for growth and development. And when I learned the vertical development framework or model, it actually helped me make so much sense of how I've been developing. And the vertical development's really a byproduct. To me, that comes secondary. That's interesting that I can see my growth stages and my development. But it has really helped me actually go to the next stage, go to the next level of my development because I've been able to use it consciously. It's actually, I've found it a really helpful model. I mean, I've used lots of different growth and development techniques, but I have a real soft spot for this one. I think it's helped me the most, actually.
Yeah, there's something to what you're saying that deeply resonates, because I had a very similar feeling when I found the framework. It felt like it explained a lot of my journey
Mm-hmm.
in a way that really made sense. And I noticed this when we introduce it into workshops or with coaching clients, and people start to reflect on how they've shifted in their growth through their lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
They can actually see their journey through the stages.
Yeah.
And part of perhaps the benefit of that after it becomes explicit. One is understanding really where you've come from, but the other one is giving you maybe language and awareness to continue growing purposefully, to really strive. We were talking before we recorded about doing the work and what that actually means, and I'd love to
Yeah.
get into that. But maybe it would be useful to, because you have such an interesting story, and you've shifted a lot through your career as well as your personal growth. If you were to look back and see how that developmental journey has unfolded for you and what that had meant in real life,
Yeah.
what have you learned when you got the framework and then went and looked back?
Yeah. Well, I can see that I sat in diplomat for quite a long time. I could really see when I was younger. I don't really remember playing too much in the opportunist space, but definitely have always been the peacekeeper, keeping myself small to fit in. And I can, that from my earliest memories, that's who I was in my family. That's felt like my place in my family dynamic. And I right through to university. It was when my first job was actually my dream job at the time. I feel so blessed. I was able to get a job as a forensic scientist in Australia, which at the time was very difficult for someone who was not a sworn police officer. So I was a scientist, unsworn scientific, specializing in forensic chemistry. And I did get a position in the federal police as a crime scene investigator. And what an amazing job to get at the age of 20. So that really moved me into my years of being expert. And that was really positive. It's exactly what I wanted to be. It's what I needed to be. And I think my experience of those years, when I look back at the vertical development framework and think, I really see the gift in expert, because that's exactly what I had to lean into to be good at my job. And that was perfect. So the bit that got challenging is when I started to move into leadership positions. And I was bringing that expert kind of lens into that. And I think I'd had that role modeled as well through my whole career, that the leaders, if I look back as a generalization, they were really operating quite a lot from expert. So that's what I thought, that's how you did leadership. It wasn't a very encouraging environment, put it that way. There was a lot of lack of trust. There was a lot of control. There was a lot of, I think, feeling like because we were leaders of people doing an expertise we were also really good at, we were leading through that expertise, being hypercritical, stretching into a zone where we were directing people what to do and telling them how to do their job and things like that. So that was definitely me. And so that was probably my first experience through some hard lessons in leadership, to think about, how do I do this differently? And how do I need to lead in a different way? Because I was actually probably doing some damage to people, if I'm being really honest. I had quite traumatic experiences from my bosses. And then I realized, I'm doing that too. So part of my motivation was to really shift the way I was leading, because I just didn't want to do to others what had been done to me, essentially.
I'd love to just dive a little bit more deeply into this stage and the experience of living at this stage.
Yeah.
I think it's something that we both see and have seen in our work with leaders over the years, over and over again. This moment of existential crises, when you have been an amazing expert in your field and you're rewarded for your performance with a leadership position. And you carry over all of those mindsets that have helped you for a very long time to succeed in your individual contributor, highly expert focused role, but then they start to backfire when you become a leader. And just as a caveat for listeners who are not familiar with the stages, I'm conscious we're using these labels: opportunist, diplomat, expert, and we'll be later talking about achiever, redefining, transforming, or maybe even alchemical. There's a little podcast, a very short 20-minute podcast that I recorded where I describe all of the stages, which I'll put in the show notes so people can either refresh their memories as to what these stages are and what the description is. But I think it's a really beautiful gift that you're offering, Sam, that we can actually bring them alive. We can go back into your expert moment in life and go, what was important for you? What are you aware of now, maybe that was important, that maybe you didn't see at the time? And how did you come to realize that mindset was limiting? So what was important from that mindset, and how did you realize it was not the whole picture and something needed to change? There are two questions in one in this one, I realize.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question exactly, but what's coming to mind is I felt like there was a level of competency that I felt like I had to have all the time. And it was also challenging because the role that I was doing, I would still have to be a senior leader in a major operational context. So I would have to be able to manage multiple crime scenes. I would be coordinating that. I still had to have technical knowledge in my leadership role. So there was an aspect of the role that still required some technical expertise. But what I later started to explore is that edge of not knowing everything and not having to have the answers to everything. And I think that for me was probably a big catalyst to be comfortable with that. And it wasn't until later in my leadership journey where I was a little bit more open about that. These days as a leader, I'll actually admit that to my team. Back then I wasn't in a space where I would admit that, but
You don't know.
That I didn't know. Yeah. That I didn't have the answers, or I wasn't quite sure. And I started to explore bringing the team together to actually resolve or create an operational plan or things like that. So I felt like originally it had to be all on me and I had to know everything. And also then my relationship with feedback and I felt really terrified of feedback and I avoided it and I'd be defensive and things like that. So that was also something, as I started to look at that differently, I was able to see that wasn't serving me. It wasn't serving my team. It wasn't giving me the best outcomes as well. So
what do you feel sparked that realization for you?
Gosh, I'm remembering a story when I was only 24 and I got sent interstate for 3 months to be a leader of an interstate crime scene team. So that was huge. It was a huge moment for me where my leadership skills were recognized fairly early in my career. And I came away from that 3 months. I did a lot of reflecting. I made a lot of mistakes on that group. It wasn't altogether a failure or anything. I did pretty well considering. But I was getting some pretty harsh feedback, pretty harsh, and it was a very painful experience. And so it was really those kinds of moments where I really sat with that going, gosh, how could I have done that better? I always had the right intention. And I think that's what's carried me through all of my learning and leadership experiences, that I always have positive intention in my heart. Always. I was trying to do some performance management of somebody, just doing a terrible job of it, going, oh my gosh. But I was trying to do the right thing by them and the right thing by the team and so on and so forth. But if I'd actually admitted I'm not quite sure, I'm inexperienced in that, and actually reached out for some help to the HR area that was meant to help you, just little things like that. I thought, gosh, why did I just feel like I just could do it myself? So it was those kinds of experiences, and it's in the detail.
So it's not like one big, because that's something else that people often struggle with, or they expect these shifts in growth to come as one big breakthrough, like this moment of epiphany where all of a sudden you realize, but actually more often than not, and sometimes that is the case, but only sometimes. I would say maybe more often it's more like what you seem to be describing, where it's some sort of incremental. There could be a moment or a project where you just completely feel like you've gone out of your depth and you start to realize there are some things that you maybe hadn't seen, that you where
Yes.
you need help or you reach out. So it's more incremental, right? Than this
Yeah.
explosion of awareness all of a
Yeah.
sudden.
And also, and I know we haven't mentioned this yet, but the lines of development in vertical development framework is really helpful to me. So I know you'll probably be able to explain this as well, but within each of the stages, you can explore each of the stages of development through different lenses, what they call lines of development. So my relationship to control and power was a really big one, and especially working in policing. So that was massive. So I can talk about that, plus my relationship to feedback. I'll also touch on my identity, because that was a really, probably the one thread that I've been working with the most in the last couple of years, well, probably last 4 to 5 years, which has been massive in my growth and really bumping up against that. But what the lines of development, when I look at those, it helps me understand I've never been one wholly and solely stage. Like I've been, my identity, I was a bit further back. On my relationship to power, a bit further back. I think I developed a bit quicker with my relationship to feedback. I was a little bit more, I've always been working well with my emotions. I'm quite empathic, and so emotions has been a really comfortable environment for me to sit in and work with for a long time. So I can see where the nuance of me as a human plays out a little bit clearer when I actually dig into the lines of development.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful perspective. And I think it's very valuable because we often think of ourselves as these solid blocks evolving through life, but actually we have so many layers or threads or lines, as we call them, that run through us. So sometimes our understanding, our cognitive understanding, intellectual understanding of something goes way ahead our capacity to actually do the thing we're aware of. Or as you say, your emotional intelligence was ahead of maybe your how you related to power and control. So then if you know what those lines that are a bit ahead are, or somebody helps you leverage that, you can actually bring all of yourself forward into the next level of growth.
Yeah.
And it's never a linear process, right?
It's never
We don't
linear.
evolve at the same pace.
Exactly. And I mean, my relationship with power has been a really interesting one to reflect on and work with, because I've worked for so long, 23 odd years, in a hierarchical rank structure environment. I essentially grew up, half my life I was trained to respect authority and decisions. You don't question superior, and you're in situations where there's a forward commander and it's time critical, and you just got to sometimes just follow direction, because it can be sometimes even life-threatening. It's not a time to be challenging and questioning and debating and so forth. So, but what happens is that kind of approach bleeds into every bit of of leadership, and so you get trained to sit in that space of having to work with authority a lot. And so that was a really good one for me to explore when I really faced. I have a beautiful example in 2015 when I was deployed overseas, and I was working in Netherlands, and I was helping with the MH17 plane crash investigation. And it was the first time I really came up against authority, with power without authority. So I had no position of authority over there. I was supporting role, but I was actually able to influence and lead in a way that I never thought was ever possible. And I used the relationships, I used communication and connection, building trust. And after 3 months, I was in a position to be coordinating and guiding 22 experts from around the world that flew in to do this examination over a whole week, I mean, I wasn't the lead investigator at all, not at all, but the relationships and I built, and to be able to influence the prosecutor over there to request certain examinations, so it was a beautiful example for me how I can influence without authority and power. And I really needed to experience that. I needed the lived experience of it, because I understood it cognitively and theoretically, but until I really lived it and was able to do it. And I felt really proud of myself that it was a good lesson, that you don't have to have the stripes on your shoulder to lead and influence.
Yeah. I love this example, and this is such a great example of making something object that maybe you were subject to before. In Robert Keegan's words, where when we say power, or you ask people, what's your relationship to power, people often think of power equal authority, or the formal power. Then a more nuanced later stage, let's say, perspective on power is actually those two things can be very different. And what does it take to practice power without authority?
Yes.
How is it different? If you were to juxtapose like this example that you just gave with the previous one of coordinating from an expert mindset, what would you say developmentally was really different for you? Engaged with people, because both of them are a context where actually the first one is a context where you had the formal power. But you were not happy with the final outcome. And here you didn't have the formal power, and actually you achieved some things that were really valuable for you and others. So what's the difference for you? Who are you being in these two contexts?
I lent into my ability to build strong connections and relationships with people, and I guess one of my strengths is a connector. So I'll give you an example. There was a representative from Boeing there, and I used to chat to this person, get to know them, and not with any purpose, but just it was a really lovely guy, and we were working on site every day for weeks and weeks. And I happened to have a thought around, there were some plane parts that were in a put off site. They didn't think they were relevant. And I was thinking, oh, okay, that's interesting. So he was sharing that with me. And then I was talking to a weapons expert from another country who came to visit. And I did a lot of asking questions and just being curious and owning that I didn't know. And I was like open to say, I don't know, or tell me more about that. And so I think being comfortable with that not knowing, and then also using connection, relationship. So I started to learn a lot of things, and I gathered that there was probably a plane part that they put off site that might actually have a critical piece of evidence in it. So then I had to orchestrate special equipment to come on site to be able to, because it was a really big plane part and they needed to lift it up. And so that was I felt like, oh, I needed to now influence another person. Would you be able to help us? And they brought their team in for the day. Anyway, it's long story short is that it was actually amazing that ended up being about 10 different players involved in all of this, and it actually identified a critical piece of evidence that they found in this plane part that had I not done all of that, they wouldn't have found. Now, It's not that they didn't have other evidence. It's just that it was an additional piece that they discarded it, thinking that's not going to be relevant. So it was those little things that I didn't know that's where it was going to head at the beginning. But through not knowing, being okay to admit that, being curious and connecting people, all of that. And that's not the way I operated at all as an expert at all. I would be very uncomfortable to admit I didn't know. I actually kept in my shell a little bit more as well. Probably if I summed it up, what a beautiful outcome that was. I didn't know that's where it was heading, but simply just following the breadcrumbs and chatting to people and being receptive and listening to people's expertise and connecting the dots.
Yeah, all of which, by the way, if we are to connect it to developmental theory, all of these things are capabilities that emerge or get stronger as we grow, right, through these stages. And I think what's also beautiful in this example is you still utilize your expertise because you had the technical expertise to think about things and connect those dots, but then it was so much more than the expertise and the knowing
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
had to put into play,
Yes.
create an outcome without even knowing what that outcome would be
Yeah.
in the end. So it's not a matter of discarding our knowing and replacing it with just inquiry. It's actually a matter of adding. Is that a fair statement to say? To kind of
Yeah.
add the
Yes.
mindset of inquiry while still drawing or utilizing the knowledge that we hold, but it just maybe it's holding it in a different way, more lightly.
Yeah. But and then I also knowing where my expertise ended and
Yeah.
being okay with that, owning that, because it's okay to not, that's not my space. And expertise in the plane parts wasn't my space, and expertise in weapons wasn't my space, and that's okay. And so bringing, I think those kind of major operations, global teams coming together, you absolutely have to, like, for it to be successful, you need to lean into that and bring everybody on board. And yeah, it was a really helpful experience to have. The one thing I wanted to share also is my relationship with time. So I know that that's a big one. That's when I moved into more the achiever stage, so from expert into achiever as a leader. And I feel at this stage I'm still as in a leader in the forensic space in my career. I started to, it was my relationship with time that probably was my biggest catalyst of growth, because I was burning out and I was trying to do too much. And really, actually, when I started to look at what's motivating that, like always I didn't want to disappoint people, trying to be the good girl, trying to get everything done. And the pace of everything was just getting faster and faster. It was getting to a point where I was never going to keep up. And I was, as leading through that, I really was in my fallback, as we've learned through some of your seminars, the fallback theory. Is it Valerie Livesey?
Yes,
Yeah,
I'll put
yeah,
it in the show notes. That
yeah.
work. It's
It's,
how we maybe briefly let's mention what fallback means. Um,
for me, it's where I use the word triggered. I get triggered back into an earlier stage. So it was forcing me back into expert a lot. That's probably
yeah.
one of my things. And sometimes a diplomat, but it was really undermining me, that it just wasn't working for me. And that was the one thing where I go, I can't, that thing with vertical development where you bump up against the way you're operating, you just realize I can't keep operating like this. So that was a really big shift for me. And it wasn't immediate, wasn't overnight. It wasn't one event. It was actually constant bumping up against it. And I still do today. I haven't nailed that one either. Don't get me wrong. But that was probably the peak of it, to be honest.
I'd love to double click on this a little bit if you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind, because I know it's a big theme for a lot of people. So when you say relationship to time,
Yeah.
and actually in adult development, we do consider time and how we relate to the idea of time as a line of development, because
Mm-hmm.
that relationship we have to time can evolve, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say was this relationship to time that you actually brought you to the edge of burnout and you really felt like I can't operate like this anymore?
Yeah.
When you say relationship to time, what does that mean? What did that feel like?
Yeah. It's a good question. There's a couple of parts to it as I'm sitting with it now. I'm realizing that one part of it is feeling like I need to do everything on the to-do list, that there's all these things that I'm expected to do as part of this role that need to be done. And I don't want anything, I don't want to let anybody down, disappoint anybody. And I don't want to be seen as a failure. So there's that aspect of it that in terms of time that I just need to keep going today until I get everything done and go faster and harder. And what the consequence of that is I'd be shorter with my communication with people, and I'd get pulled up on that because my emails would get shorter and my tone would get short. And I didn't mean anything negative to anybody, but it was impacting trusts and impacting all my relationships because of the way I was speaking to people. And then, so there's that aspect of it, and over responsibility. So it was time, but it's also my relationship with my identity, how I was seen. Like I was saying, I want to be seen as like I'm competent and I can do it all. There's my relationship to responsibility. I felt responsible for everything and I had to do it all. I guess it's not time in and of by itself, but if I think about how my relationship with time has grown now, what I sit with, what's the next best thing right now? That I don't think of time as linearly as I used to. I'd have to compare it to now to understand back then what was I doing different. Back then, it was very linear. I had my to-do list. I was working through it. I had to finish it each day. Whereas now, I'm sit more in the space of trusting that things happen in the right time, that time can expand and contract a bit. So I find that, gosh, if I don't get to it today, that was actually a real gift because as it turned out, like the following day, a direction change happened that I didn't know was coming, and it would have been a waste of time back then. I take a more relaxed view of time, and I also allow when I don't get things done, also that sometimes that pushes back on the system that expects you to do everything and kill yourself and work till 9 o'clock at night. And I'm just not going to do that. And what that means they think of me is not my business as much as like, so I don't know how that explains it. So there's a few aspects linked with time for me.
There are these two words in Greek, and I know we've talked about this before, but this could be possibly an interesting maybe resource or additional thread for people to follow if they are struggling with time listening to this, because all of what you're saying resonates so deeply with my own experience of all of those days where I feel like I'm rushing through stuff and I only have 24 hours. And what do you mean time can expand?
Yeah.
The Greeks had the word chronos for linear time, the 24 hours, and this sense of this is all you get and you've got to cram it all in and you're rushing. It's like a struggle with time. So chronos is clock time, but then they had a different word for, I think, the kind of expanding, contracting, timely moment that you're describing. They called it kairos. Kairos was this universal time, this way more complex notion where time is no longer linear. And sometimes doing nothing or waiting for the right time for something to be ripe for action becomes a thing in itself. And I'll put an article on this in the show notes, but I do want to ask you this because in the space of kairos, that complex, multi-layered kind of sense of time, the idea of becoming present comes to the fore for people, becoming really, really present in the moment. And versus when we're in clock time, in chronos, we're always rushing. We don't really stop to think or to reflect. And I wonder if you've noticed this coming in for you, this capacity to be more present, or if this has made any difference in your experience of time.
100%. And I will default back into that type of achiever way of approaching time very easily. And the only thing that really pulls me out of it is to be present, to take a moment and do a mindfulness practice, a simple, nothing complicated. Literally, I just take a breath and notice my breath. Just actually, what I find interestingly is I bring myself back to my body. And when I tune in, it's almost like I'm forward. I'm forward energetically. I'm forward. I'm all in my head. And I'm like, okay, let me just take a moment. And then how about I tune into a different intelligence here? Okay, it might be my intuition. What do I feel is the right thing here? What do I need right now? And sometimes that is actually, I log off and I go make myself a cup of tea, because then I realize I'm in an energy state of forcing something because I feel like I should do it. I'm being driven by some should. And I think, what if I just pause, take a moment? And it's that, I know this is a bit kind of cliche, but I take a break from thinking about that challenge or problem or whatever it is I'm working on right now. And I give my subconscious mind to chew on it. I go and have some fruit and I go play with the cat. I don't know. I sometimes even go and sit on the grass outside in the sun and just think, I'm just going to take a moment and ground. And, there's a bit of letting go. There's a bit of, I feel like that hero leadership that can come out in the achiever. I can just, you know what, I'm just going to put it down for a minute. And then when I regroup, sometimes I don't pick it up again. I think, you know what, now it's not the right time. And I got a good example of that. I had a conversation I felt like I needed to have with my supervisor. And I kept thinking, I need to have it. I need to take action. I need to be firm. And then I felt it doesn't feel like the right time. I actually, when I just paused and stopped trying to push and feel responsible, and I need to speak up, and it was absolutely the right call. And I think 2 weeks later, I ended up having that conversation, but it totally shifted. The energy was right. The words were right. Everything, it was just perfect if I'm waiting 2 weeks. So I would miss those moments and weaving with time a little bit, dancing with time in a different way instead of being a slave to time.
Yeah. Dancing with time instead of being a slave to time. That could be a beautiful, beautiful tagline to print out. And I could use actually having that in front of me when I go down the I don't have enough time trap, which I fall into quite often.
Yeah. I have to remind myself that's one of the things that I have to consciously work on. So there are some things that I feel like I've grown through, and it's a bit more of an unconscious habit now, but that one I always have to consciously work on, and I find myself back there, and that's okay. I'm much kinder to myself these days. So that's one of the things I wanted to share about my shift from achiever more into redefining. I realized part of my sitting underneath my achiever operating mode was a lot of self-judgment, that I was motivated to improve because I felt constantly not good enough. I felt constantly self-critical. And oh my goodness, my inner critic was so loud and really mean, if I'm being honest. She was so mean to myself. So that's something I still to this day have to work on. I also am trained in strength profile. And when I first did my training, I got my profile for myself, and self-doubt was one of my highest weaknesses. And I thought, oh, okay, I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. Then I think a year and a half of actively working on my self-worth and my self-esteem and owning my strengths and working to my strengths and all this kind of stuff. And I was so excited to do my survey again, and my results were my top weakness was still self-doubt. And I was devastated. I'm like, God, I thought it would have shifted at least into a learned behavior where I can work on it. And anyway, so
it is so funny how you take an improvement mindset to improving your need to always be improving.
Yes. I thought, you know what, that was a big moment for me to just go, you know what, that's always something I will have to keep an eye on. But I've stopped being so hard on myself that I'm not okay, that more leaning into growth due to wanting to serve better as a mother, serve better as a leader, serve better in my coaching, not because where I am right now isn't okay. And I think that has been a big gift for myself. And just leaning into self-compassion, oh my gosh, has really helped with that self-criticism. And that's probably what was a big help moving more into the redefining. And probably my biggest example of my redefiner, especially from a leadership perspective, is where I embarked on a major work health and safety culture transformation in the organization. So it was it was something I was really passionate about, the conditions in which we were working in, the mindsets of the staff, myself included. I could see I'd been moving out of, we would self-sacrifice ourselves. It was quite normal. It was very normalized. And I thought I could really see when I pulled back, zoomed out, as we say, my perspective going, this isn't right. And I also was getting some physical symptoms. I knew the conditions we were working in were not good for us and not good for us physically. So when I was in a specific leadership position that's called the capability team leader, I essentially tackled that. I remember driving down to Canberra to set up a special meeting with the executive member there, and I had a whole pitch organised, and I managed to get money to get data. So I got an occupational hygienist in, and I got them, they gathered the data that we needed to really demonstrate what was really happening. So it wasn't just my perception of things, this was actually hard evidence. And then it was beyond that, post that, I should say, that was the real journey of having to work through a real redefine on type leadership, because I was challenging the status quo. I was really standing out, and I was getting so much pushback, and I found myself navigating this kind of being a redefiner, but still deeply uncomfortable emotionally. And I think that sense of identity and how people saw me, and there's still that bit of that diplomat aspect of me playing out. So gosh, that was hard on so many levels, but a real gift to me in my growth, only because I was so clear about what I felt was right, and that was driving me. And so yeah, that's probably a really perfect example where I really, really challenged the status quo, and then it cascaded around the whole of Australia. So every laboratory ended up being renovated. It was a whole shift of the entire work health and safety way of operating and mindset and culture and so forth. It was amazing what journey the organization went on with me, and they really embraced it in the end. But it probably took about 6 to 8 months, maybe even 12, to get it to that point. And I was driving that and facing my redefiner big time.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story so much, because I think that's another really sticky point that I see working in organizations when leaders start to grow internally out of that achiever, very driven, very linear, very goal-oriented mindset into this redefining space, which we call the first step into the post-conventional, into the later stages of development. There's this massive shift of awareness where you start to see the system that you're in, whereas before you were in the system. There's a really beautiful cartoon that embodies that idea, where two fish are swimming in the ocean, and an older fish is swimming from the opposite direction, and the older fish says, "Hello boys, how's the water?" And the two younger fish just look very puzzled at each other, and they don't answer anything, and then they swim on. And then one of the younger ones asks the other, "What's water?" So
what is water? What's he talking about?
Yeah. What is water? What are we talking about? So I think from an organizational perspective, this is an example of you becoming aware of the systemic forces playing out, and in this case, impacting well-being in the work you were doing. And then you step into this redefining space, and as you well say, you come up with an initiative, and initially you get a lot of pushback. And then take something, and I'm curious, what do you think that something was that allowed you not to completely withdraw back into more comfortable ways of just complying and getting on with it and giving up the radical idea, which is something that it's a phenomenon we see a lot. And in the research, Elaine Herman Barker calls it redefiners in hiding, where people have the capacity to see the water, but they choose not to talk about it anymore, and they just play the roles that have been assigned to them. So they're really hiding that potential instead of bringing it in and putting it in the service of changing the system for the better, which is what you did with that initiative. But what allowed you,
Yeah.
what do you feel enabled you to not pull back and continue advocating and pushing for it despite getting the pushback?
Keeping my perspective broad. So what I mean by that is I kept thinking of the future, like the next generation coming through, the effect on their body, the effect on their mindset. So it wasn't just the physical environment and the laboratory conditions that we were working in, but it was also the cultural mindset of the WHS conditions. Like it was almost like we were proud if we had come back from a job and we were all cut up and bruised, and we almost used it like, wow, look at this. And I was one of those. I did that. Like that was me. And it was when I couldn't unsee the broader perspective anymore. I couldn't unsee it and go, would I want that for my daughter? What about the next generation coming through? So I think the bigger picture held me, that it was not about me. It wasn't about whether people liked me. I really struggled with that. And there were times where I had to put the button down a little bit. But what was the real beauty is that there were a couple of other people that picked it up on my behalf. And I had a couple of people that were in my corner. They were not senior people. But they every now and then they would just come to my desk and thank me. And I almost feel emotional thinking about it. Like, and I've shared this with this one guy. I said, if it wasn't for you, I don't know if I would have got through all of that. Yeah. He just kept anchoring me in what was the bigger vision I was
Find your other redefiners. Who are the other redefiners around you who can support you when you fall down and help you get back up again?
Yeah. And what I then went in a few years where I probably lent into my redefiner a little bit too hard. So it wasn't until later in hindsight where I realized I became a little bit too much of okay, now I want to change everything. So there was another thing. I ended up being the chair of a committee for 18 months, and it was the Culture Reform Committee for New South Wales in the police. And I think there was a lot of good that came from that. On reflection, when you can push too hard in the redefining space and kind of push against things too much. And I had some really difficult experiences where I was talking about the conditions for females, because it was off the back of it coming to the surface, the actual what it's like for females working in the organization at the time or historically. And I remember talking to somebody about it, and they were so hostile, and I was meeting that hostility with hostility and really trying to push and poke and prod the mindset shift, and it didn't work. In hindsight, like I would have and wish I could have taken a bit of a different approach, but that was the journey of growth I went on, and that's okay. Like I had to go hard on redefining to then maybe I had to ease off again. But that's really what some of the pain points of that kind of pushed me perhaps a bit more into exploring the transforming stage a little bit more too.
That is something that I keep on talking about, and it's a very sticky point in especially as the interest to vertical development has exploded, and there's this easy idea that the later stages are automatically better. And actually, I think even as you're illustrating it through your own story, there's no inherently better. Each stage enables us to see something more or comprehend and act in more complex ways, but each stage has its own limitations, its own shadow side, as we would say. So just being aware of that and how we bump against those limitations, which at Redefining, it's such a great example that the big limitation is becoming an advocate for change and becoming hostile in that advocacy, where you're no longer open to listening to the perspective of the representatives of the status quo, or whoever we perceive as, from a redefining perspective, as the status quo. And then actually that backfires in a way where the redefiner is a bit isolated or rejected or no longer can gain impact with even having the best intentions for
Yes.
reform and changing things for the better. And I'd love to hear, what is your lived experience of this tapping more into transforming? What is different? And I know this also came with a radical career change for you as well, which you haven't
Uh-huh. I know I haven't
spoken
talked
to,
about that,
but
have
we're coming into it, and it feels,
I?
and just knowing you, I know these are connected.
Yes.
But what's different in that space between
Mm.
redefining and transforming, and how did you live through that difference?
I'll answer that, and then I might loop back to also some of the identity shift. I said that was probably a key growth thread that has led me to where I am now in my career. But where I see transforming shifting is I'm finding I'm less judgmental of the pages, and I am using them a little bit more consciously. I have also reconciled duality and polarity a lot more. So I can also hold different levels of truth. So let me talk about duality for a moment. I can see that they are often on this, they are the same thing, just different ends of, if I look at a pole, one's on one end, one's on the other end, but they are intimately connected. So I am able to, hold different levels of truth. That at expert level, there's a level of truth, but then the different stages, and that's just through this framework. If I take it even more broader, I can just see that everyone's operating from where they're at. And for me, it's about exploring, well, what's going on for me? What's my trigger? Like, what's coming up for me? And really being curious about that. And the more that I've lent into that, I find I've lent into the transformer. I've never tried to grow on the vertical development scale. Like, that's not a goal for me. I found that's been a byproduct of my own exploration. And I wanted to share one of the things that was a real gift to me was working with my shadow aspects. So, and to me, that's a big one. So, like, one of my biggest shadows is arrogance. I really judge arrogance. And it was a really big moment when I realized, okay, where am I arrogant? And it was a very humbling experience. Like, I can be very arrogant in my parenting, I can be very arrogant in my marriage, I can be very arrogant at work in different contexts, different conversations, different situations. And when I started to really own that, it helped me integrate that part of me that I was not owning, I was not seeing in myself. But I have a number of them. There's a few that are really, really big ones that I still constantly have to work on. Like, it's not that they go away when I sit and do a process where I literally will write down, where do I do that? Where do I do that? Like,
So you look
narcissism.
at things that trigger you, or you
Yeah.
find annoying,
I
or
judge, like I judge in others,
you judge.
and I think are bad, and it doesn't have to be those kinds of personality traits. It can be like incompetence. Like, there was something recently where I was like, it's like incompetence really frustrates me and gets me going, and I don't have patience for it. And you can understand that, well, logically, that makes sense. But what I did was I sat down and I wrote down, where am I incompetent? And it was really eye-opening. Like, I'm terrible with my budget. I'm so terrible. Like, and just owning where I'm incompetent with some of my with my daughter, or not able to manage my emotions when I'm hangry. That's a big one. I'm just like, oh my God. So working with my shadow aspects has been probably one of the biggest gifts to help, like what I've, if as an observation, would have helped me move more into operating and transforming, because I feel like in transforming, there's a bit of less judgment in me of where everyone else is at. And that's probably been the biggest gift for me as a coach as well. Not only to own that part of me so that I'm not judging that subconsciously, energetically judging that. Like, it's there's more neutrality to it. It's just where they're at, and that's what they're growing through. And so that's a big one.
Mm.
And I wanted to touch on my identity thread line of development, because I now work in leadership development. So I moved from a forensic scientist and a leader in the forensic space into, for a very brief time, I say it was a cameo in culture reform, culture and inclusion. And then I moved into leadership development, and I was working in the Federal Police Leadership Development team. And that was just such a beautiful gift. I didn't actually think I could redefine myself inside that organization. That was a real challenge for me. Now, a lot of people leave an organization to be able to reinvent themselves. I reinvented myself inside the organization, and it was probably more challenging for me than for other people. I think they could see what I had to offer more than I could see what I had to offer. So that was a journey for me to really own a different skills and experience and gifts that I had. And it took a long time for me to settle into that. Then, as we were laughing before this podcast, I said, oh, I'm happy to own the fact that we did record this podcast already once before, and that was, I had a complete meltdown after that, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment, but that was just before I had another identity shift. So I ended up leaving the AFP. So we recorded that, and I'm still with the AFP, and like there's so many gifts and so many positive aspects around what I was doing. Like I was loving so much of the work I was doing. There was something about me wanting to spread my wings and own this identity in another environment. So that's where I then got this position in another government agency, a state government agency, as a manager of leadership development. So it's really been maybe extra challenging, I think, working in leadership development, like coaching people or leading programs in leadership development and being a leader. And it's almost like it's such a big motivation to walk the talk, I can tell you that, and own my stuff like on a level like you wouldn't believe, because I feel like I'm really exposed. An example, like I do one-on-one sessions, and my team do these workshops where they teach other leaders to do good one-on-one catch-ups with their team. And I almost feel like every time I'm having one, I'm being assessed by my team. I'm like, oh, am I doing?
Are you actually walking the talk?
Am I saying what I want to encourage a feedback culture where we openly ask for feedback. And I'm like, gosh, am I doing that? I haven't asked for feedback for a long while. How am I spruiking that? It's the culture I want to create, but I'm not doing it. So it's like, it's a great motivator to really work on myself. But yeah, so in terms of my identity, I really found myself moving into this whole new part of myself. And I really struggled with, I almost collapsed in on myself. Like it's a real growth edge for me around owning my strengths, owning who I am, like that.
You were talking before we started about being seen and also connecting that with your passion of supporting women leaders.
Yeah.
Because we have talked about your journey as a human being, but you have been a woman growing in a quite male-dominated work environment, and that is a challenge that I think many women leaders struggle and can deeply relate with.
Yeah.
We've come to the point of this as we're heading to the end of this conversation, but this is a really powerful, I think, struggle for a lot of women growing and investing in their own growth, and maybe even feeling like it's not enough, so I can't let myself be seen yet. I still need to do some more. I still need to polish some more, and maybe I'm not walking the talk enough. And that was part of the reason why we never released that first episode of the podcast. And I'd love to, is there anything you want to say to that maybe has been something that you've learned from it, but could be food for thought for us women struggling with just owning who we are and letting ourselves be seen?
After that podcast, I had just total anxiety. And I thought, wow, like what is this? And so I sat with that, and one of the practical things I do when I say I work on myself, I know I've shared I'll do shadow work and I'll actually write things down and do self-reflection on that kind of thing. But and of course I have coaching. I've also got some friends who are psychotherapists, and so they're good at holding space and help working through things with me. But I also actively work with somatic practices. So one of them is neural emotional technique, and it allows me to tap into the wisdom of my body of like, what's going on here for me? And it gives me some insights. So what was coming up for me, because I was so triggered, that's the word I use, and my nervous system was really in fight or flight, which made no sense cognitively. And I knew I was safe. I knew you said to me, like, we can review it and we don't have to release it if you don't want. And you were just so beautifully gracious and kind with this journey I went on. But for some reason I felt terrified, absolutely terrified. And I'm not exaggerating. So what came up through my NET session was this terror of being seen, that it was actually life or death type of level of fear. And it didn't really fully make sense. But what I was able to do through that modality is release some of that trauma and trigger in my nervous system. There were some things from my childhood which I was not consciously aware of, but came up in that session that made me realize, oh, it was not safe to be seen back then. It was not safe when I was younger. There was a few things that happened that as an adult, I look back and I think, well, that's not that bad. But as a child, it was really, I felt very unsafe physically. And so that took me on a big journey. I mean, I'd already had a thread of that because I've been working with presence work and techniques, somatic techniques, where I can anchor and sit more in my body in a way that makes me feel safer inside of me, but also working with my skill and competency to handle difficult situations. So I have what I realized is my whole life I've had experiences and challenges that I've felt out of my depths with, and I almost didn't have trust in myself to handle difficult situations. So I started to become aware of that, and being a bit kind to myself, that when I was younger I didn't know how to handle that. So I get it, but now as an adult, like, how can I support myself? And I think for me, with work, the environment that I worked in for so long was male dominated. And look, not all females have this experience in policing or male dominated environments at all. And I've spoken to some and they're just like, that's just never happened to me. But for me, I felt I have a lot of examples that I could share of very uncomfortable, difficult situations when I was mostly in my early 20s to mid 20s, when I was vulnerable, and it taught me to keep a low profile, to not be seen, because that was easier and safer for me. And nothing kind of major happened. I skirted around some what could have been a worse situation. But I think, yeah, and that's part of what I can see a lot of females that I've mentored or I've coached, or they have so much potential to offer, and for all sorts of various reasons, they really keep themselves small. And I think it's anchored in a lot of there's very healthy reasons to keep yourself small and keep yourself safe. Like, I think, but at some point, I wonder if it's time to break out of that, or to grow beyond that when you're ready. And those are the people that I'm really passionate about working with, that I feel I'm at a point where I know I've got more to offer, I've got greater potential, but I know I'm holding myself back.
Yeah.
Due to, whatever has happened. And yeah, I could see a lot of that in females in the organization I worked in, especially when I started coaching people in the organization. And yeah, so that's what I'm really all about. I know I went through that journey myself. So I think often what you go through, I've worked through that a lot, and really want to help others work through that if that's what they're ready for and interested in, and relevant to them.
Yeah, that resonates so deeply, Sam. And I just feel this whole conversation has been a a gift of you letting yourself be seen. I want to ask you, how do you feel about it?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So yes, that is so front of mind, but again, a real gift. Thank you, Alice, for it. I have been working on that still since last year to now, and I'm much more comfortable with it. I'm not fully comfortable with it, let's be honest, but I know that this won't resonate with everybody, but some people it will. And if that can help one person. And one thing I really wanted to just highlight before we finish is that the vertical development is a framework. It's a way of looking at things. But at the end of the day, for me, it's all about what's practical, what's going to help me with my parenting. Like, how do I work through this challenging situation with my daughter that we had earlier this year? Like, what I want to control everything, and she's turning 13 and she's starting to, I need to let go. And I bumped up against my fear of letting go a little bit more as a parent. And I had a challenging relationship here in a work context. So how do I navigate this working with this colleague? And for me, it's all about practicality. And I do find the vertical development framework really helps me navigate that. But the practical exercises of reflecting and working somatically with my nervous system, and coaching, of course, coaching sessions where I'm challenged on, like, someone reflects back at me, like what I'm like, where I'm stuck, or like what loop I'm in, or things like that. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's about real practical, tangible things that I can do to help my life and help my clients and make my life and those around me richer.
Yeah.
And if that means being seen to help with that, then I'm there for it now. Yeah. I think it's time.
It's time. I often say that the biggest reason why I do this work is to attempt to the best of my abilities to live a more conscious and wiser life myself, and hopefully enable others to do the same. And as a last question for you, Sam, I'm curious, what's your highest hope for continuing to do this work on yourself, or seeing more people become aware of and maybe step out of their comfort zone? Because so much of what you shared are examples of really stepping out of your comfort zone constantly. What's the hope you hold? What might happen if more of us do this work as lifelong work?
I think humans are very powerful. And I think that if we really harness what each of us, our unique gifts that we have. I think about humanity is like, if you think of a sphere, and every single human on the planet is like one point on that sphere. And the more that we become congruent with who we are, who I am, and you do the same, and the next person does the same, and we live in that authentic state and bring that through in what we do and offer the world, we can make and create the most beautiful world for everybody. And I know that's feels like a long way away from the stage we're at now, but if any little thing I can do that brings one person, one leader closer to that. And I'm especially passionate about working with leaders because I can see they have a lot of impact on other people's lives, and they can do so much good. It's almost like exponential impact they can have. And so if I can just shift that dial, it can sometimes be just that one conversation that can kind of leave a residue with them that shifts their dial slightly so their trajectory goes in a different direction, then I think that's worth it. And so for me, I see there's a place for people, a role for those of us that want to help humans get to that place of greater alignment. And that's, for me, where I feel my place is these days. So, yeah.
Onwards towards that more beautiful world, step by step.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your wisdom and your generosity and just your humanity, Sam. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you, Alice. It's been beautiful exploring this and my journey. And I know everyone's going to have a story and a journey. So hopefully there's something in this that resonates with others and they can take something away that can help them in their own life. That would be my greatest wish and intent. So thank you. Thank you for making the space.
I share in that, and I'm looking forward to comments and ideas and just for people sharing on the podcast page how this has landed for them. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thanks, Alice.
I've taken so many lessons and so much wisdom from this conversation. It's hard to decide what was most valuable, but a few things stand out for me. One is this idea that Sam so beautifully embodies through her story, that vertical development only happens when we are truly, profoundly taken out of our comfort zone. And that can happen in two ways. Either life chooses for us, pushes discomfort or brings it our way, and we have to respond. And in that painful response lies the potential for our growth. And the second option is later on, as we mature and we become ever more conscious of the value of discomfort, that we choose it. We don't wait for life to send another challenge our way, and we intentionally push ourselves or step outside of our comfort zone. And that is a very hard choice. There's this saying that I hear a lot, and I really think it's deceiving in many ways. The idea of becoming more comfortable with discomfort. I think it's deceiving because we never truly become comfortable with discomfort. But we might become aware of the growth that's always hidden in discomfort. And with it comes a choice to step into it whenever we can. And the other wisdom nugget for me from this beautiful conversation has been Samantha's story of her evolving relationship to time. From struggling with it, wrestling with life to get stuff done, to dancing with life and dancing with time, and really sensing into what is the right time to act versus what is the right time to wait. And that for us action-driven humans, always chasing the next goal, can be a huge, huge stretch. Perhaps sometimes the best action is inaction. So with these thoughts, I'm inviting you to reflect on what stood out for you from this conversation. What might you feel called to experiment with or play with in your own life? You'll find Samantha's website in the show notes. And on our Substack, verticaldevelopment.education, you can find a lot of other interesting conversations with humans who are doing the work of vertical development, as well as plenty of articles exploring this topic from many, many angles. So do subscribe to get the newest articles in your inbox every week. And until next time, stay awake, conscious, and kind to yourselves and others.